User Experience Dallas, also known as DFW UXPA. My name is Brian Sullivan. I think most of you know me. If you don't, I'll probably know you by the end of the meeting. That would be great. So, first timers, raise your hand, please. Awesome. Rockstar. Welcome. Fantastic. How did you guys hear about us? Friends?
Leslie Davis.
Yeah, Leslie Davis. Actually, I did hear that Leslie invited a few people. Good. Who's new to the meetup group? Excellent. I have a lot of interesting news for you guys, as well as for everyone else. So, a couple of things. I did recently list, there is the poker tournament. It's a little fundraiser for the one basketball team. That's on Sunday. If you can join us, that'd be great. It is one where the money will be going towards that particular nonprofit. And my son is on that team, so you'll be helping out my son. They are going to Vegas. They're competing in 2 tournaments, the Fab 48 and the Adidas Super 64. They'll be there all week. There's nothing like the Mojave Desert in July. So the other thing I wanted to announce, we do this every meeting, is there anybody that is hiring? If you are, go ahead and stand up and announce. Is anybody looking for people? Okay, so what's your name?
Billy Simpson.
Billy Simpson. All right, you want to talk about the...
We are looking at Argo data. You handle banking software and healthcare software, mostly banking. But right now we're looking for entry-level, intern, sort of kind of test it out, test the waters sort of deal. For UX, research, design, development, all of the above.
Awesome. So there's probably some candidates that should talk to you, Billy, right?
What's that?
Should they talk to you?
Absolutely.
Okay. We can do that afterwards during networking time. Anybody else? Okay. I know of 2 opportunities. One is a user interface lead, more of a front-end developer is what they're looking for. And then a UX lead, this is at Verizon, and they would be reporting to Preston McCauley. He couldn't be here tonight because his wife just got back in town and he's doing family time. So he did want me to make those announcements. So more of a front-end developer lead and also a UX lead over at Verizon, working and reporting directly to Preston, which I told him that's really pretty cool because Preston's a good guy. All right. Let's see, the other thing is I have made the announcement for, there's another workshop that's coming up in July. It's the UX Inspections Primer. That's something that I did a couple of years ago. Very fun and interactive workshop. It's $100 for professionals and I think $60 for students. And then there's a group discount. All of that's on Eventbrite, all of that's on Meetup. Okay, so if you want to come to that, that's great. Love to have you there. We've had about 6 people so far sign up. I'll end up having about 30.
When is it?
July 19th. We're really testing. Awesome. It is July 19th. That's a Saturday. It'll be out in South Lake at the Sabre campus. And as always, lunchtime is at Torchy's Tacos. And then the last week in July, we're doing a game user research panel. So that'll be very interesting. And it'll be led by Joshua Hall. He used to do playtesting at Gearbox. So he has somebody from id Software, I think EA Sports, and the Gearbox playtest manager right now. That'll be a really good panel. So if you're interested in gaming patterns, what's going on with respect to game user research, gamification, Game of Thrones, whatever. That, all bets are on for that panel. Lisa, you want your?
You caught her with a mouthful of food.
Ladies and gentlemen, Lisa Miller.
So the updates from the User Experience Professionals Association.
If you haven't signed up to go to the international conference in London, which is next month, I suggest you do so. It's going to be an unbelievable conference. We've got a great set of speakers. I know it's an expensive thing because it's in London, but if you have never been to London, it is the best time to go. You'll be going for a conference, you'll be around other people, and people there can tell you places to go and things to see and things to do. A lot of us are going a little bit early, just because we like London and we haven't been in a while. So it's truly we haven't been back to one of the European countries for a while. We co-sponsored the Hong Kong conference last year, which Brian was at. And so we'll be in London this summer. We have some new webinars that we'll be announcing that we'll pick back up in August. So we decided not to do any webinars for July, since most of us are all tied up with the conference. But we've got a couple of webinars. We'll have another one on part of our UX Fundamentals series, and it will be on human factors. And how many of you are former students of Erica Oric, by any chance? A few of you? All right, Erica's going to be doing that webinar. So for those of you who've been through her classes, it'll probably be a good refresher. If you haven't, talked to one of the people who's been in one of Erica's classes, and she'll be able to, and they can tell you what Erica's like. She's pretty wonderful and is now living in the Seattle area. And I kind of miss her because I used to work for her. So that'll be one of the webinars, and we're also looking at doing a mobile usability testing webinar in August, if it doesn't get pushed out to September. But we've got new webinars coming. Be sure to check the website, which is uxpa.org, and you'll find the newest things that we've got on there. And if you have any questions about UXPA, come see me after the meeting.
Duran and Ken, come on up. Yes. Yes. Give it up for Ben, Duran and Ken. Ken, tell everyone what you're going to talk about at Big Design.
Oh, so Big Design's coming up. That is a fantastic local conference many of you know about. Brian put it on, obviously.
What are you talking about?
And I have the honor of speaking of what's before mobile first. And it's 7 ways to hammer your design into shape. And I'll be bringing a lot of tooling and things to improve your workflow and help you to polish and find bugs and just improve your site. So I can't wait to share that.
And Duran?
I'll be talking about building sites to respond to time. So I'll be building a time machine so that you can scrub your website and dive through time and see how it responds to different points in time.
That should be so a good example of that might be World Cup or the Olympics, right? So
For me, I used this technique on my website for my wedding, which happened last year. So if you're interested in something like that, you should come to my talk.
awesome, guys.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
Thanks so much.
Good. So we have a couple of speakers here tonight. So a little bit of information on Big Design, and we'll get started with Noah Wheeler. So early bird registration ends at the end of the month. So the second best rate you could get, super early bird, ended at May 31st. Early bird ends though at the end of this month, so get on that. We have announced workshops. The workshop's really good one by Corey Lepson. It's usability in a day. Corey is the president of UXPA International. He's flying down and is going to give that workshop and hang out with us, which is really neat. We're doing a prototyping workshop with Acture. Joanne Wright is back by popular demand. She had 50 people go through the program last year. If you haven't went through it with Joanne, she's an expert. She's actually extremely amazing. There's a couple other workshops out there. What I do want to say is our keynote speakers are going to be Jeff Gothelf. We'll hear about that tonight, right? Yeah? Okay. Lean UX guy. He wrote the book on Lean UX. Okay, he will be our opening keynote speaker. Our closer on Saturday is Adam Polanski, UX strategist for Bottle Rocket Apps here in town. Rahel Ann Bailey will be talking on content strategy, opening up Saturday. Our closer is Oscar winner, Emmy winner, Phil Tippett. He worked on films like Star Wars, Jurassic Park, RoboCop. We're going to give him 2 hours because he's got a lot to cover. There are 70 different talks that you can choose from on that Friday and Saturday. Go out to bigdesignevents.com, click on conference, and you can check out all the great talks and speakers. Or you can talk to Ken and Beren, and they'll tell you about how awesome they are. So without further ado, we're going to go over to Noah Wheeler. There's a couple of things that I can tell you about Noah Wheeler. There are 3 things that I hate about him. Okay? He is smart. Okay? He is very funny. And he's pretty good looking, too. So, I mean, those are 3 things that he's got going for him. But he worked actually out at the company that I'm at, out at Sabre for a while. He came over, we had a lot of really good conversations. He reached out to me, what was it, 8 months ago or so? Yeah. We went, of course, to Portuguese Tacos. And we talked about lean UX and healthcare and what he's doing. It's really good work. Anyway, I told him he really should probably think about doing this for a meetup. And here it is 8 months later. Noah Wheeler is going to share with you listening to the changing world, lean UX in this healthcare startup. So take it away, Noah.
Thank you very much. That was really fun. How much time do I have? An hour, an hour?
At least an hour.
At least an
Take it long.
hour. So I was checking out the attendance list today, and it looked like we could have quite a mixture in the room. So how many people are here in UX? Who works in UX? Okay, and who works in healthcare? All right, and then who works in both? Nice. Okay, so we have quite a mixture in the room. So I'm sure some of you had experience with projects where even though you gather insight early on in the project, when you finally get to the end of that project and deploy to those users that you gathered insight from originally, things may have changed. It may be just a completely different project. Maybe the users don't even want it when you get it out in front of them because of this change during that process. So that's the focus of today's talk. Today's talk is on listening to a changing world. Mean user experience in a healthcare startup. Several years ago, I was asked to help evaluate the deployment of a handheld decision support device in a neonatal and pediatric intensive care unit. The nurses in this unit were taking care of very small infants. They had to calculate very exact dosages for these infants. And sometimes these dosage calculations were quite complex. So what we were deploying was this device. The nurse's task was to enter the medication name, the dosage amount, using this numeric keypad. So it was both alphanumeric as well as numeric information that they were entering. Needless to say, this was a very user-friendly device. No, it wasn't. Nurses called it the green machine. They described it as inefficient. They needed training to interact with it. It was time-consuming to use, and they frankly just abandoned it and said, it's just faster by hand, forget this. So, healthcare is changing. There's changes in regulations, there's rapid growth in the IT sector of healthcare. And so there are user experience techniques which are needed to respond rapidly to that dynamic and ever-changing environment. Typically, user experience is implemented in the following fashion. First, there's this planning phase. Maybe you get some insight from your users during this phase. Maybe you go out and do some field studies. Then there's this design phase, a detailed design phase. And then there's some testing and refinement. Perhaps you get some more input from users at that point. And then there's this deployment and testing. The problem with this approach is that the time period between the planning phase and that deployment and testing phase may be vast. And the user's needs may have changed, the market may have changed. So for instance, when that first planning occurred, there was no such thing as an iPhone for the green machine. So when that was actually deployed, nurses were like, well, I've got an app on my phone that does this exact thing. So they actually didn't need that device anymore. So they saw it as antiquated. So this approach does not work in a field such as healthcare, which is rapidly changing and rapidly evolving. In recent years, the lean startup approach has become quite popular. At the center of this approach is the build, measure, learn cycle. So you build the smallest part of your product possible. You measure the market and the user's response to that feature or that prototype. And then you learn from whatever you've measured. And you take that, what you've learned, you take that back and integrate it back into your build process again. And you just keep iterating and iterating and iterating. This might take a week, maybe 2 weeks to go through. So you're not having this long development process. Applying lean methods to user experience, Jeff Gozelf wrote about this in his book, Lean User Experience. I highly recommend this book. But in this book, he defines lean user experience as a collaborative, cross-functional approach which gets the product in front of your users faster, and gets the response to them faster, and it reduces things such as documentation while increasing a shared understanding among your team members. So why lean user experience in healthcare? If lean user experience had been employed during the development of the green machine, there might have been a better fit between the market and the product that was being developed. So the market didn't want an old, antiquated device. They wanted a new iPhone application. And also, there might be a quicker response to changing users' needs. So if the nurses no longer needed this type of calculation, then the device could have changed much more rapidly. We didn't actually have time. I was there for over a year, and they actually were not able to change anything in the software during that period because it took so long to develop and deploy that. It would probably been much more innovative. This device probably would have been possibly an iPhone application. It probably might have fit a different need than they were thought that they needed to fulfill. And also, there just would have been a much more rapid deployment of new features and changes to that device. So who am I? My name is Noah Wheeler. I love to cook. I work for a small healthcare startup named Simple Interact. I love to design, research, and test great user experiences. And I like to dabble a little bit on the coding side of all this. All right, I'm going to stop for different points throughout my presentation and ask for any questions, feedback. We can take 2 questions about, yes?
So in UX, I understand fail fast.
Correct.
That sounds alarming in the healthcare industry.
Correct. So, you do need to get out in front of your users as fast as possible. I mean, obviously, it's not saying don't mitigate risk. So you do want to get out in front of your users as fast as possible, but at the same time, do it in a safe manner. So maybe deploy to a smaller group, maybe not actually deploy, but get it out in front of them to make sure it's actually working. So in certain areas, yes, there are risks, like for instance, medication calculations are quite risky. And it's a matter of mitigating that risk when you fail. So, I hope that answers your question. See? We can take one more question. Yes?
So my understanding is with the lean UX method, a lot of what you're trying to do is working in getting input from kind of bigger data sources. How are you getting that to work with the healthcare industry where everybody's on like a different EMR and a different system and has like different hardware that they're working with?
So I will get into that a little bit later, and hopefully my section on experimentation will answer some of your questions where you control for those random factors that might be influencing your product. Now, hopefully you have control over your product that you're developing and deploying, but I talk about some techniques a little bit later in the presentation. And let me know at the end if I don't answer your questions,
Okay.
where you control for those random factors that are occurring in that environment. All right. So here's an outline of my presentation for the day. First, I'm going to go over Simple Interact, which is the healthcare startup I work with. I'll talk about Guerrilla User Experience Testing, which is a rapid way of gaining insight from your users in the field. talk about measuring the user experience, several different techniques we use for that, and then conducting experiments in order to determine how your changes are actually affecting the user experience. We're going to talk about how we take Guerrilla user experience testing, measurement, and experiments, and integrate that back into our building process. So here's what Simple Interact is. We're a patient relationship management solution which builds relationships between small medical providers and their patients. This is our team. We've got a diverse set of skills. We have a lot of fun while developing our product, and it's just a great collaborative team. It's small. Anybody can talk to anyone, and anybody can do any part of the job. So here is our product. When a patient first arrives at a small medical practice, such as a dentist office, instead of completing paper intake forms, they are provided with a tablet check-in. They complete the check-in forms, and we've tested with all types of users, all age ranges, all demographics, and pretty much anyone can use it. Once they finish and complete their check-in, and they finish their visit and they're back home, then we send them a satisfaction survey regarding their experience. If the patient is satisfied, we direct them up to Google Plus to provide a review on places such as Google Plus, Yelp, or Health Grades, and then dissatisfied patients are directed back to the practice so that the practice can resolve any pain points they may have. Throughout this entire process, we're gaining valuable insights for the practice regarding their patient experience as well as things such as demographics for their patients. So here's some pictures of our product. This is the dashboard that the practice managers can use to gain those insights. Then we also have on the right there, we have the tablet check-in, users completing a check-in on that. And then on the phone, we have a user completing a satisfaction survey on a mobile device. So how do we integrate Lean into our methodologies? We have 1 week sprints, so we try to pare down what we're trying to deploy so we can deploy within a week. We then conduct user experience tests on that deployment and collect analytics on the user experience. And we take what we've learned from those and add that to our team's knowledge base. Then we take what we know about our users and we implement that in our future releases. Specifically, though, the goal of user experience at Simple Interact is to gather that knowledge and to implement that knowledge in our design process. Notice that we don't focus on identifying issues or troubleshooting or anything like that. Our goal is to gain knowledge regarding our users, and if we gain knowledge regarding our users, then we're able to integrate that back into our development process. If we're simply troubleshooting, we can't learn from our mistakes, and we keep solving the same problems over and over again. Does anybody have any questions about who Simple Interact is, what we do, how we integrate Lean into our process? Yes.
So when it comes to getting that customer data,
Yes.
does that imply that you could be testing something that was created 2-3 weeks ago?
It may sometimes, but we try to test as soon as possible or get insight on that as soon as possible. It might be different techniques we use. We might use analytics, we might use field tests. It really depends on what question we're trying to answer. So I know some people in the room might cringe at this, but we don't test everything before it goes out. It really depends on the question we're trying to answer. If we're trying to change a little wording on our surveys, the most appropriate way to test that is by actually seeing it. It's not necessarily to go out and collect a full-fledged usability study. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. What's the longest period that you might have? So
We could start collecting data immediately. So, in some form. Yes.
And I was going to ask about the repository for that information. Right? How are you capturing those insights, and in what kind of repository?
We use an online wiki. Part of the Lean approach, though, is that we're not overzealous on documentation.
Right, that's what I'm asking.
So we like if I collect some field notes, I just transcribe those notes online. I don't write a report. I don't do all that stuff. I just transcribe those notes online, and we also have access to send out an email saying, hey, this is our response rate following this change or something like that.
I was just curious if you were using something like Evernote or OneNote or
No, we use Confluence.
Confluence. Okay, good. That's all we can do. All right, thank you.
Great piece of equipment right there. All right. Can I grab your question? Next point down. So how do we gain those insights? One technique we use is Guerrilla User Experience Testing. Guerrilla User Experience Testing is a rapid way to collect insight on users' interaction with your software right out in the field with them. Typically, usability testing is conducted in a laboratory. There's a user who's brought into the lab, they complete some sort of representative task on a computer or a device, and there's extensive amounts of recording done of this interaction. There's maybe a facilitator in another room directing them through the task, and there's stakeholders, developers, and designers in that room as well observing the task. This approach is, can only be conducted not that frequently, and it's frankly not cost effective in a startup like we're in. So this type of testing does not work, but that doesn't necessarily mean we can't test. So we use a technique called what we call Guerrilla User Experience Testing. We're not the ones who use it. But we, before we ever had any clients or any product, we would go out to places like Starbucks and just approach people there and say, would you like to try out our product? We'd sit with them for 5 or 10 minutes. They would, 10 to 15 minutes, I say. There would be, we'd have 3 users complete check-in. At that point, we were heavily checking the testing the check-in process. And we just take tons of notes on that. And we would identify issues, and then we would take the issues or learn things about what users were expecting from our product, and we take that back and integrate that back into our next release. So this was before we ever had any actual clients. Now that we do have clients, we test regularly on site at our client, on site with our clients. We sit with patients while they're checking into the practice. We have them complete real check-ins, so it's really almost like ethnographic observations where we're observing them in their environment, completing real tasks. We usually have about 3 users per test before we do anything about anything that we're noticing. And we take tons of notes again. We're constantly integrating what we've learned in these back into our development process. One example of something we've learned while testing in the field is we've created these checkboxes which were the recommended size for checkboxes. However, users would tap on them repeatedly because they still weren't big enough. So what we started doing is we started to add this shaded area around the checkboxes and then provided them with ample feedback regarding if they had tapped the box or not. So we wouldn't have known this unless we were sitting with them in the field while they interacted with this. Another example is users would sometimes think that they were done with the check-in process, and they would just turn in the tablet to the front desk. So what we started doing is we added this progress bar at the top, and that allowed us to, that provided them with feedback regarding where they were in the check-in process, and then they stopped turning in the tablet early. What have we learned from our Guerrilla testing? We find it's important to train your recruiters. Your recruiters are the people sitting at the front desk. They're the people, they're not trained user recruiters for a laboratory. So we found it was important to tell them how to introduce us to patients, how to tell them that our test is confidential. It's also, we found it's important never to be afraid to ask our clients if we can test on site. Our clients have always been more than welcoming to us coming on site and sitting with their patients because they see it as us being conscientious about what we're deploying with them. They see it as us making sure that it's user-friendly as possible. I also find it's very important to conduct other observations while we're there. You're not going to be testing constantly while on site, and so we conduct other observations about the environment, such as how many hours are the staff spending calling patients to remind them about appointments. We also found it was important to give ourselves plenty of time. Users don't show all up at once, so we bring our laptops along, and we do a little bit of coding and testing while we're waiting for patients to arrive. Any questions?
Two,
Okay.
and they're rather important ones. The first one is because you're going into a medical practice,
Yes.
you're also subject to HIPAA yours.
Correct.
And how do you deal with that, especially since you've got somebody in their program trying to develop while there's a patient around?
Can you repeat the question? We couldn't hear it.
Oh yes. What about HIPAA issues regarding testing on site? So we don't. The only recording we're doing are the notes. So we as a team are HIPAA compliant. So we have the strictest confidentiality regarding what we record, and we don't actually record any identifying information while we're doing
I'm
that.
going to ask the question of, have you guys been through the training?
Yes, I have been through it.
All of you should. Anybody
Yes.
who's on site.
Okay. Yes. Yes. So we, but like to your question about confidentiality, though, like we never record any identifying information regarding them, and we do have a informed consent process, which we keep separate from any data we do collect, which is our simple notes. What other question?
Well, the other one went back to the original picture you showed.
Yes.
The green lights.
Yes.
And what you've talked about so far is recording information that is typically non-numeric. I mean, you've got some insurance numbers there, but if you get that wrong, it's not a hugely fatal issue.
Correct.
Whereas if you're dealing with dosage on medicine and stuff like that, now you're really talking about accuracy, because you get that wrong, somebody gets hurt.
Correct.
So how do you deal with getting accuracy? You know, how do you provide? How do you ensure that you get accurate information out of the user as part of your user UX?
So how do we make sure that the user is accurate?
The user.
Okay.
Depending upon what you're
So
presenting.
it's slightly two different settings. So the green machine example at the beginning was with highly trained nurses. How would we have ensured that they were accurate at that point in time? I would have said that we should have got the product, or at least prototypes of the product in front of them multiple times beforehand and iterated on those prototypes initially. That would have prevented, like, you don't want them trying out your prototype to calculate the dosage. That's right, correct. So I would have iterated on some sort of, I wasn't involved with the development process, but if I had been involved with that, I would have recommended some sort of iteration on a prototype prior to actually deploying a device that they were actually calculating dosages on. So yes, it has to do with, again, mitigation of risk. How risky is it to have them actually trying it out? So in this setting, it's not that risky. The worst thing that can happen is they enter the street restaurant. So, absolutely. Yes.
So like in my last visit to the doctor, they made me fill out like the normal paperwork, and then you would hand it back to them. Then I asked her, the lady, that do they always like put it in the computer database or not? So sometimes they're like, if you're a frequent visitor, then they put it in the database, or sometimes you just like file it down and don't do anything with it. So in your case, when you have the tablet and then all the information everybody's entering, like what are you here for, or like, you know, all the data. So I assume that you're like storing it on their computers, right? I mean, you're not storing it on your side, because not all like would be comfortable with you storing all the, you know, their data on your side.
Well, we're completely HIPAA compliant in our data storage process, and so we're completely capable of holding health record information, and we currently the process is that we can integrate with whatever system they're using, but we aren't at that point yet. So they actually just transcribe from our system into one system still.
So they're cool with like you storing it on your side.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, we're
That's what I'm
completely
asking.
compliant like any electronic health record system.
We're also covered by what they call a business associate agreement. Typically in HIPAA, any partnering product or vendor is covered with the BAA. And so that is what covers us from HIPAA perspective.
All right. I know I have some other questions over here, but I'll get to you guys in the next section. All right, so Guerrilla user experience testing is not the only way that we measure the user experience. It's one thing to measure something, but it's so much better to measure with goals in mind. We have three primary goals in measuring our user experience. We want to gain, as I mentioned earlier, knowledge regarding our users, about their knowledge, their expectations, and their abilities. We have three primary ways of collecting this. One is our analytics. So again, in regards to like HIPAA compliance issues, these are all anonymous metrics regarding their interaction with our product. We also distribute surveys such as the system's usability scale on a continuous basis to our clients, and they distribute them to the patients, and we track those scores as we go along to see how changes we've made affect those their perception of the usability of our software. And then again, as I mentioned in the Guerrilla user experience section, we conduct observations of users interacting with our product as well as staff interacting with their product as well. And it's, we store all the insights we gather on an online wiki called Confluence, and we just keep simple notes. We don't spend a tremendous amount of time documenting those notes, but we allow all our team members to have access to those data. So what have we learned from measuring the user experience? It's important to use analytics, and especially use those sort of fine-tuned metrics such as task completion time, click-through rate. It's not really possible to collect those while observing users in the real environment. You're going to have too much information coming in, and it's better just to collect holistic notes at that point. It's also important to focus on understanding your users and not focus on issues. If you focus again on issues, you're not going to be able to take that knowledge you've gained and integrate that back into your development process. You're just going to continue to just troubleshoot. You're going to be like, oh, they have this problem, so we solve that problem. You're not going to actually have that deep understanding regarding your users and be able to integrate that back in. And also, it's important to measure continuously. So we have continuous metrics such as the system's usability scale that practices are distributing to their patients, and also get out in the field as much as possible to test with those users, and also the analytics are all in real time, so we can see how changes we're making are affecting things such as like response rate on their survey. All right, does anybody have any questions? I know somebody over here did. Yes?
That was me. I guess I have two questions.
Yes.
First one being able to test in a Guerrilla UX setting.
Yes.
What's your recommendation for software that is a little more complicated, that actually needs some kind of inside knowledge, highly skilled users to use? What's your recommendation of getting testing data in a low-cost way?
So I guess my first question would be, do you already have clients? And if you do have clients, then try to get some insight from them at all possible. I do see where that could pose a challenge. If not, then the next best thing would be like looking at like things such as analytics. So Guerrilla user experience testing is not always going to work. It's important to try to mesh, the restraints that you have on who you can recruit and the actual measurement techniques that you use. But the most important thing though is to match your goals with your measurement techniques. So if it's shooting them an email and sort of getting some insight in that way, if that's the best you can do, that's better than nothing. At least you're getting some insights on their response to what your ideas, your thoughts, your prototypes, etc.
And I guess the second question I have is, if you don't try to, when do you actually go back and try to do troubleshooting or fix the bugs? Is it after all the sprint is done?
No, we do that within the week sprint. So we have like 1 week sprints, and that is a production-ready piece of software by the end of that week. We are not there's no bugs in that before. So that is when within that week sprint. The key to getting yourself down to a 1 week sprint is to deploy the smallest thing possible. If it's a change of a button, if it's a change in a little bit of how the users are flowing through your application. Get it as small as possible, because then it allows you to answer that question and get you onto your next release and validate the ideas you had regarding that, as opposed to developing a huge new feature and having troubleshooting all throughout that. much more. All right, I'll keep moving. All right, so it's one thing to measure the user experience. It's even better to be able to collect those data and make sense of those data and understand how your changes had an impact on user experience. So typical experimentation process in a usability setting is you observe the users interacting with your software, possibly in a laboratory, possibly in the field. You change the interface in some way, and then you see how the user's behavior or the response to that has changed. One problem with this approach is it's very, especially when you're testing the field and collecting data from real users, it's kind of hard to determine if the changes you made actually impacted their behavior. Because other factors might be at play there. So for instance, we deployed some minor wording changes to our survey. We saw an immediate drop-off in response rate. And what was going on here, and we realized what had happened was it was tax season. And just users didn't have time to complete the survey. And we immediately saw our response rate pick up right afterwards. So we thought we had changed something and something horrible had happened, but in reality, it was tax season. So those are the problems you face with this sort of linear approach to problem solving. Another example, which actually turned out to be successful, was that originally patients went through every single screen every time they checked into the practice. They completed every form. This was taking 10 through 15 minutes, and this was just unacceptable for the practices. They were not getting the patients in fast enough. So what we did is we added these simple yes/no button questions where they could skip entire portions of the intake forms if those sections did not apply. And so this reduced check-in time to about 5 minutes per check-in for patients, and this was a great success. Now, if we had plotted those data, we would see that before the implementation of the buttons, we'd have this high check-in time. And then after the buttons, we see it decreases. However, we still don't know if this was due to possibly a change in season, or if different patients were coming in. It's really hard to definitively say that our changes actually had that positive an impact. So one approach we might be tempted to do is where we only deploy to practice 2, as opposed to practice 1, and see how the implementation of the buttons coincides with changes in behavior. So does check-in time decrease when those buttons are introduced? One problem with this approach is we only deploy to practice 1, and also something might have just changed in practice 2. That is unique to them. So maybe they had different patients coming in, and that was actually the cause of the change. So these are approaches we haven't started using yet, but we would like to use, is where you do what's called stage deployments, where you deploy to one practice first, and then you would deploy to the second practice a little time afterwards. So give yourself a little time, and then you see how the change in behavior coincides with the change in the interface you made. And this built a very strong case for your change actually having an effect on the user experience. This sort of goes back to a question raised earlier, is when you're trying to control for those other random factors that might be causing a change in behavior, this is a way you can do that, to rule out those other random factors that might have caused that change. So what have we learned from attempting to conduct experiments in our setting? One is don't deploy to all your practices all at once. We need to do a better job of ruling out those random factors that might have caused a change in users' behavior. It's very important to answer why. Why did the users' check-in time decrease? Was it because of our change? Was it because of some other factor? If you're able to answer why, then you're able to take that knowledge and then implement that in your next deployment. If you don't answer why, then you're simply in an exercise of troubleshooting. So it's very important that you answer why did the users do the thing that they did. Does anybody have any questions regarding experimentation, the logic that I'm laying out there? Yes.
So, did you do experiments on an older baby boomer population with with your software?
We collect data from everyone, all ages, all education levels. It is, we have had people in their 90s check in. So now to control for that and to make sure that we're affecting the population equally, these techniques give us that ability to say it wasn't because they were just older this month. But we do sit with users and watch all age ranges check in.
Okay.
So
Do you categorize the data across different age groups to find out?
do we attempt to categorize? No, we do want to start to look at like profiles and things like that. But for right now, we haven't done that. So. Okay, you guys find it out.
Do you ever go back to, in the example of the buttons, do you ever go back to adding
back features?
Yeah, to confirm your findings?
No, that would be amazing. But that's an excellent point. Yeah. So if we did went from that slide. So if we his question is, what if we reintroduce the buttons for practice 1 at a later point in time? But that would build an extremely strong case for it. I don't know if it's necessary at this point for us, but that is right along the lines of this logic, is to sort of to have these controlled releases and to see how behavior changes as you change it again. That's an excellent point. Yeah, that's where you're changing it again. Yeah, absolutely. That would make an even stronger case.
All right. What's the strangest thing you've seen doing this?
Actually, I know this is not really strange, but I've been surprised by how many people are not familiar with touchscreens. It might be 40 or 50%. So that's been shocking to me. But I know that's not super strange.
Who's the weirdest person you've met doing this?
You can't tell that.
Yeah, I was already pointing.
People struggle with the entry on the tablet.
They do. But frequently within a few screens they've caught up. We use a lot of things like autocomplete. We don't make them fill out their entire address. We use Google location to leave their address on the top of like. So we do a lot of effort to do that. And frankly, this has been through an iterative process of getting out there in front of users, seeing what they're doing, going back, making a little tweak,
What was the biggest surprise in what you've learned when you started?
What was the biggest surprise? I think it's like the lack of like. I assume in the tech industry, I've lived around people who are very technologically literate. Everybody is not, but that's just not the case. It's shocking to me. A lot of the staff are also experienced with technology as well. So I was very surprised and very informative. I mean, frankly, they don't really have any interest in it. So their task is to maybe enter some data in a computer, and that's all they do with a computer their entire day. And so it's very important to take that into account. It's the reality that we found. So, all right. So I'm going to quickly go over how we take what we've learned from the Guerrilla user experience testing, the measurement, and the experiments, and integrate that back into our building process. So how do we take the lessons we've learned and use those lessons? So there are 3 primary methods we use to build the user interfaces. First, we sketch. We always sketch before we get started to make sure that our team is on the same page regarding what it is we're building. Usually we do like multiple people do multiple sketches, and then we sort of see commonalities across those to determine which direction we're going to go design-wise. But this is heavily influenced by our user interface guide. So our user interface guide is a living document regarding what has worked and what has not worked with our users. So if one type of button works and another type of button works, and we jot that down in our user interface guide. This makes sure that we're not solving the same problems over and over again. If we have this document, we say this button works. We don't design other buttons. We just use the buttons in the user interface guide. Another technique we use is we leverage frameworks such as Twitter Bootstrap and AngularJS. For those of you not familiar with Twitter Bootstrap is a very lightweight HTML, JavaScript framework which you can develop interfaces very rapidly. We don't do anything like photoshopping or balsamic or anything like that because we can get from those sketches to our code within days. And it's much faster than using balsamic to make nice looking prototypes. So it's just much faster just to go ahead and code the HTML if we use these frameworks and the libraries we've developed. So what are the important lessons we've learned from building the user experience? Don't reinvent the wheel. Use frameworks, use a user interface guide, record the lessons you've learned. Also sketch, don't Photoshop. It's just an extra step you're adding. The purpose of sketching and doing that initial prototyping stage is to get the team on the same page and understanding each other. We don't need to have pretty Photoshopped images to communicate that message.
What kind of tools do you use for prototyping?
Just paper pencil, and then we get into the code right away. So we just understand where we're going, and then we, since we have the frameworks in place, it doesn't really take us an hour or two to actually get even just a mock-up going. So
The fact that you're using Angular means that you can do these kind of things because the way it falls into the back end.
Yeah.
For those that haven't used Angular, I highly recommend you do the Angular in 30 minutes or Angular in 60 minutes course. It is a godsend to transport the back end of that.
it really speeds you up tremendously. You can get real data going through your interface very fast. Bootstrap. But so this is a summary of the lessons we've learned for Guerrilla user experience testing. Train your recruiters. They're not going to be trained user recruiters. Conduct other observations while you're on site. This is a valuable opportunity to observe other interactions with your users. Give yourself plenty of time. Bring along a laptop, do a little coding on the side, and then also never be afraid to ask your clients if you can test on site. They'll thank you for it. Use analytics to focus on the fine-tuned metrics. And focus on understanding your users, not just troubleshooting the interface. Measure continuously. Use analytics, collect surveys. For experiments, answer why. Why did the users click on the button? Why did they behave the way they did? Also, do a great job of ruling out those random factors, and this can be done by just deploying it in a staged manner. When building the interface, don't reinvent the wheel. Sketch it. Don't Photoshop it.
Question.
Yes.
About your artifacts or lack of them. And do you have an audience that you have to show stuff to besides yourself and your team?
No.
Investors, stakeholders, somebody like that has to.
Product is the living document. So we don't have to have vetting process. So, can you hold for one second? So what if these approaches have been applied? I'm almost done. In the development of the green machine, I suspect it would look quite different. Might have been an iPhone application. Might not have calculated dosages. It might have done a completely different function. If they had iterated and learned from their users throughout the development process, it probably would have been quite different and easy to make changes to that. Any questions? Fine. Yes.
So I'm a little curious. I was looking at your team. You have everybody up, and it seems like everybody's very adept at development, including yourself. You seem like the closest thing that you guys have to a designer is the UX. But it seems like you guys don't really put a lot of design into your work from a visual standpoint. Is that correct?
Like, what do you mean by visual design?
The only reason I ask is because you say sketch, don't Photoshop.
Yes.
But when you guys go write the code, do you have a style guide? Is there?
Yes, yeah. So the user interface guide is a living style guide. So that has snippets of HTML that we can plug right into the interface. We do leverage a lot of Bootstrap, so there's a lot of that built into it. I'm working on my Ph.D. in human factors, so I do have a lot of the basic sort of like Gestalt principles down, and how to provide feedback, and how to provide balance in the design as well. So that's sort of implied in that process. So again, we're not handing off a Photoshop thing for it to be coded. I would say our team is, while we're not graphic designers, we do have some design background. So.
The only reason I ask that is because I feel that, so my background is UX industrial design.
Okay.
And right now I work in kind of strategy UX capacity in healthcare.
Okay.
And I find that in a lot of B2B products, you don't have the graphic design. And I feel like the people that work in healthcare have experienced products that have great design value in consumer goods in their everyday life, but then they come to work and they work with these products that don't have that same kind of appeal or flow. It's, you know, it takes away the distraction when you have that good design. So I was just kind of curious why that decision was made with your startup. And I understand startup resources being an issue. So I'm not picking on you.
No. I would say we do pay attention to and again, none of us have degrees in graphic design, but we do have, we do spend a lot of time, thinking about the aesthetic of it. So, but really the user interface guide is, we fine tune a design pattern, and we reuse that in order to drive consistency across the product. But we do spend a lot of effort on making, especially for the patients, to make it look beautiful, because frankly that is very important to them. And we also do make those efforts for the practice manager side of things as well. So I know we're not a big design house, but
Can I add one more point?
yes.
The concept we apply to our product is simplicity. It's in our name. And the way we think about it is, think of an app you download. You're not going to get any training, and you're not going to call support. 2 minutes you decide whether to keep the app or not. And that has to apply to a check-in tablet, because you're dealing with patients of all ages without any training. They need to work on it. And we have spent so much time on this product without the graphic design part, but with other techniques that actually work. We had a child of 10 years old who filled this out herself. So it's, we score very high on the SUS scale whenever we do those tests. So I would not go as far as to say that just because we're not doing it in a certain way that we're not focusing on
Beautiful,
fluid, simple, extremely easy to use. It's Fisher Price simple. I would actually, I'd be happy to show you the tablet and you go through it and you give us the feedback.
Yes, right.
How frequently are you doing the Guerrilla UX?
I anticipated somebody would ask. We don't do it for everything. It really depends on our goal. So if a goal of a release is to increase survey responses, we try to find the best way to answer that question. If it's sitting with the user and watching them complete that process, then that's fine. Probably with a survey, though, we're going to actually just go ahead and deploy that and see what they do at home. Because it really doesn't matter what they're going to do in front of us. What matters is what's going to happen when they get home. However, with things like that, if we change we changed our drop downs from the standard Android drop downs to some custom drop downs. We got it in the field and we tested that to make sure that was working. So the users were understanding how to interact with that, and we did learn some valuable insights about that. So I would say if I put a number on it, probably about once a month.
Can you describe what your daily activities are like during this 1 week sprint? Let's say your sprint starts on Tuesday. What are the things you do on Tuesday? What is your team doing on Wednesday? What are they doing on Thursday?
So we're not stuck to necessarily the calendar. We are keeping it within 7
Right.
days.
Just describe a typical sprint and what activities take
So
place.
typically, we sort of at a high level map out the tasks that need to be accomplished for the sprint. So sort of like a to-do list. And again, we use some online resources for that. We do that in a typical agile manner. So we have and then so we identified like screens we need to design, and then we a couple of team members, whoever's involved in this sprint, they sketch out their ideas. Then they exchange those ideas and sort of see what other people have sketched and sort of find commonalities across that. And then usually we jump right into coding. And then
Does that all happen on day one?
no, sorry. that would probably happen across about like 2 to 3 days.
Okay.
And then usually the coding takes another day or so, and then we do a lot extensive amount of QA testing as well. So about a day, at least a day or two of that. But it's getting a little bit above a week there when I wrap it up in that way. But usually it is 7 days from the kickoff till we actually say go ahead, let's deploy this. So that being said, then sort of an answer to related to Brian's question, we don't normally actually get out in the field till after it's actually already out there live. As we scale, that's going to become more and more risky, and we're probably going to want to do it to a subset of clients, or eventually things are going to have to change to make sure that we don't deploy something that blows up in our face. But at this point, we have a small enough sample set that we're able to learn and handle that risk.
So you've identified your screens maybe based on research that you did the previous sprint?
Yes. So we integrate into the screen that we've learned. A lot of it's heavily relying on that style guide, because that style guide sort of embodies what we've learned about what design patterns work. So then the sketches are we try to align those with that. If we're designing something completely new, we may have to come up with new patterns, test those patterns. But usually that's not until after some form of plan. So, does that answer your question? No, I didn't give you an exact timeline, but it really also depends on what we're deploying. Because if we're deploying something that's possibly like has a lot of like back-end work on it, the screens may be a very small portion of that entire process. So I know it's a rough sketch. I'm sorry. Yes.
Regarding that user interface guide, how do you prevent it from becoming a weight that prevents you from making some sort of change? There it is, it's written down, therefore you can't change it, versus this is a better way, so let's change it.
We do compromise, and it really depends on, like, is this functionality we're building today 99% similar to the functionality we built yesterday? Here's the interface. We're always open to new ideas, and if we're saying, well, we're really applying that pattern today, it's not going to work anymore, we will compromise and come up with a new pattern and test that pattern. No, it's not the Bible. It's not simple. So, we are flexible about what that is. So, our first step is to go to it. Yes.
Well, in desktop software, we have a lot of inputs, right?
Yes.
In tablets, we also have inputs.
Yeah, so when the user sets focus on a field, they actually have yes.
So one of them is, what grade level are your instructions written at in your survey written at?
Our instructions for the tasks they complete, we just ask them to complete a check-in. That's literally our instructions. Or we ask them to. Yeah, so it's a lot more, especially in Guerrilla user experience testing, it's not going to be the same as a laboratory test where you give somebody possibly a sheet or something like that. It's usually more of a conversation with them.
Talking so much about the testing itself, but literally, you give somebody the tablet and that's all it says is
Oh, I see what you mean, like on-screen instructions. There's really not that much text. If we have gotten to the point where we haven't measured the readability level, but we have an extensive amount of saying, like, people just don't seem to be getting the screen, so then we do end up tweaking the wording to respond to that confusion that they have. But we actually haven't measured, like, fleshing at readability of those instructions. But we do strive to make it as like short and simple sentences as possible. So
you might want to think about that.
okay.
Speaking at a 12th grade level, college level, or maybe 5 words, or you could be speaking at a 4th grade level instructions. So just keeping it short and simple is really not. Do you guys do anything in terms of cultural issues
so we actually we have the capability of switching back between Spanish and English. Right now, we don't have any practices that heavily serve that population, so they haven't requested, but we have the ability to switch back and forth.
And then is the check-in process different for different practices?
Yes, absolutely. Yes, we have different specialties, so they have different screens, and they can configure which screens are shown for different practices. So, for instance, we have a psychiatric practice. They have special questionnaires that they want to assess the patients with. That they have their own screens. The dentist practice doesn't see that. So.
So you said that you tested on your users and patients.
Yes.
You guys test on the medical person receiving back the tablet?
We sit there with them and observe them. So I mean, we're not like actually telling them to do tasks as much. It's very similar to the patients, but we do sit there with them and observe them interacting with them. So.
And then the last question is about, you said that you guys take very simple notes.
Yeah.
If you understand the product because you're deep in it and doing it every day and all of that kind of stuff, but then what do you think about there being a knowledge drain?
I mean, the notes are for everyone, so I'm not writing them for myself. I am writing them. All our team has access to them, and I am writing them for this. So.
But you said that you write them in a very short, concise way.
So I'm not doing detailed documentation. And the documentation I do 20 days ago, 30 days ago, is probably something we move past at this point. So really, we're always trying to move forward and understand our current users. So while I did talk a lot about building that knowledge base is constantly changing. So I highly suspect that our product will be very different a year from today. Because we're not building a static product. The whole purpose of this is to iterate and respond to change. So, does that answer your question?
Nicole, did you have a question?
I have a question.
Yes.
So the scope of what you're doing right now is patients in doctor's offices and at home, or?
Well, they do complete certain things, like so they interact with emails and surveys at home.
Okay.
But currently, the check-in process is in the office, but we are in the
And
process
is
of
that
developing.
growing to include more tasks or more users, and how do you see that changing?
More users in regards to like completing the check-in process at home.
Yeah, or other tasks that staff might do in the doctor's office without.
We're open to expanding, but more we've found we've decreased scope as
Okay.
we've gone. So we've learned what clicks for users. My favorite story is I'm sure you are all familiar with Instagram. They started out as a very complex social networking tool, and what they did was they found that the camera application within that social networking piece of software was what users actually wanted. So frankly, we pared down what we were shooting for. So right now, we're really focused on what I described on those screens.
So then the data feeds into other systems then, or is it?
Currently, they're transcribing it, but we do have the ability to integrate with other systems if they want us. So we're in the process of looking into some hooks that we can get into that. So.
Let's do one more question. Anyone? Yeah, Mark.
What's the role of the doctor? You mentioned, you showed the screen of the 10, 15 minutes to check in,
Yes.
and then 5 minutes with the yes and no.
Yes.
So how does the doctor see the information that the patient submitted?
So it really depends on the practice. So for instance, the psychiatric practice, the doctor receives actually a text saying that the patient is checked in, and then they also have access to any assessments that they might have completed. It really just depends on the practice workflow and what the doctor determines is something that we have the ability to print out.
I'm talking about like, does the doctor have like their own tablet where they see irrelevant information?
Yes. So we do have a dashboard where they can have access to that.
Okay.
It just depends on what the preferences are. So we do have that.
Doctor's walking down the street, sees a talking frog. He picks up the talking frog, puts it in his pocket. The talking frog says, "Mister, if you kiss me, I'm a beautiful princess and I'm yours forever." And he takes the talking frog out of his pocket. That's cool. Puts it back in his pocket. The talking frog says, "Mister, didn't you hear what I said?" He said, "Yes, but I'm a doctor. I work all the time. I don't have time for a girlfriend. But a talking frog is cool."
Thank you, Brian.
Noah Wheeler, everybody. The good thing is we finished a little early. That's awesome. There's more pizza, more drinks. The NBA draft is on the big screen. We can network. And then, was it Argo? If you guys want to talk, what was your name?
Billy.
Billy. I was going to say Ken. Billy. That's what I said. Billy, will you be here for a little bit?
Yes.
Great. Elisa will be out there talking about UXPA. I'll be out there to talk about anything you want to know about the meetup group. Ken and Bryn, can you guys hang out?
Yes.
Talk about your talks. And then any
I'm
other
available for
questions?
questions if anyone's come and grill me afterwards.
And then I did get a Facebook message from Preston, and he says, "I need that UX lead or UI lead really bad. So if anyone wants to go work for Preston at Verizon, he probably wants to talk to you tomorrow." Okay? All right, break. Let's go ahead and go out there and let's network, okay?
Thank you guys.